And voila, like that, we're there. This afternoon, we're sharing space with who I think of as the Bilbo Baggins of Bigfootery. This guy, sort of a legend himself. You're really going to have a good time. I'm referring to the one and only Daniel Perez. But before we get into that, let's introduce my host. I think my host disappeared. Okay, here we go. Yep, Mr. Thomas Steenberg.
Hi, Jerry. Good to see you. And I think Leon's backstage now, too.
Indeed he is. Indeed he is. And Mr. Bill Reed.
How you doing, Jerry?
Thomas? Doing good.
Bill.
And our long-lost brother, Mr. Leon. Good day, sir.
I looked for the link. I couldn't find the link till like 5 seconds ago. I'm online waiting for you for a half hour. Obviously, my brain's not working very well. Hi, guys. Okay,
well, whatever. Whatever. No one's interested in your excuse. And our guest, of course, is Daniel Perez. Daniel, welcome aboard.
Hi.
It's an absolute joy to have you on this program today. And we've got a lot to talk about. So let's talk about your baby, the Bigfoot Times. And you'll be proud to know I am a subscriber to the Bigfoot Times. And you started this publication back in the 90s when there was already a bunch of newsletters on the subject out there. And I guess this was just before social media too, so that was breathing down your neck. So what possessed you to start a newsletter against all of those odds?
Well, let me explain briefly. It was right around 1997 or thereabouts, and I was working in the Bay Area of California. I'm a union licensed electrician. And I was getting Ray Crow's The Track Record, getting Don Keating from Ohio, his newsletter. I think there was another one from Ohio as well I was getting. I can't think of the guy's name.
Mark Francis?
Mark Francis, I believe. And then Connie Cameron was publishing the Bigfoot Co-op. And these were all newsletters that were ink on paper that were mailed to people who were subscribers. And so that's what the world was at the time. Things went out in the postal mail. And right around that time, I'm not really big on computers. I was never really a computer guy or a computer buff or anything like that. But I knew enough to know that that would probably be the direction of society in general, that people would have these electronic devices, a desktop computer or a laptop. So I heard about the laptop computer and I went over to one of the electronics store, Office Max or one of those stores. And I looked at one and I said, well, I bought my first one, which was an IBM ThinkPad. And as I was doing that, I thought to myself, I would like to publish a newsletter as well, because I published one back in the 1970s called the Bigfoot Times, one word. Mm-hmm. And I said, now that I have more time on my hands, I should launch another one. And this time, my objective at the time was to go head on, compete directly with those people who were publishing the newsletters, which I thought could be better. That's my summary of their newsletters, that they could be better. And I thought, I'll go head to head with these people and I will get all their subscribers subscribing to the Bigfoot Times newsletter. And so that was I launched in January of 1998, and it is almost August of 2024. And I am the last man standing. All of those newsletters are gone. So this,
25th anniversary last year. Congratulations,
we're on
man.
the 26th year right here. This is the latest edition. This is the August edition that just got mailed to you and about 900 other people in worldwide. And so this is the August edition, and it just went out. It's printed on the yellow paper, and it's 4 pages long, and it's very condensed and concise. And so we built up a following over the years. And so that is the newsletter. And I had faith in myself. I said, if you publish a quality product, or the word is words, build it and they will come. I built it and they came.
Boy, did they ever. What do you think? What do you think? Why do you think you survived when the others didn't?
Because it's time. It's a timely newsletter that I get it out on time, and I put high quality information in there that you generally can't find on the internet. In fact, that's one of the reasons why people do get the newsletter, is that I've had several people comment to me at the conferences, says, the stuff that is in there, you really can't find on the internet, but you can find it in your newsletter. And so that's one of the things that makes the newsletter unique. And the thing about, say if you were subscribing to a newsletter online or something, somehow over the years, those newsletters, online newsletters, go corrupt, or you lose them, the files. But when you have a physical newsletter, you could get a little folder and put your newsletter in there and keep them forever.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm old school. I'm old school. I'd like to have something in my hand and read it, than look at a computer screen. I hate all my favorite books are on Kindle. I'd rather have it in my hand, and but that sounds to me like a heck of a lot of work, Daniel. I mean, we're talking about the back in the day of snail mail, phone calls with rotary dials. Where did you get all your information to fill out a monthly newsletter?
Well, as of today, I believe I have the largest physical files on the planet on the subject of Bigfoot. And so when Warren Thompson, a Bigfooter in the Bay Area of California, passed away, I took receipt of all of his files. But the original Bay Area group files was started by the late George Haas. When George Haas passed away, Warren Thompson took over them. And then when he passed away, I took over the files. But even prior to that, I've built up a substantial collection on my own. And so with my collection and their collection, it is by far the biggest collection on the planet.
You and Thomas lived in a golden time. I call it the golden days of Sasquatchery or whatever, because you guys met the real live characters, many of whom are not with us anymore. You guys attended the conventions when a convention was a convention, and you received a lot of information, and you learned things from it. I think the last one we had in BC was in '95 at Harrison. There's another one at UVC. I forget what year that was. But
1978.
I mean, there you go.
And like Monsters on Trial.
Mm-hmm.
These guys, these two guys know all the dates and the names and the times of anything. They're like little encyclopedias, little robotic encyclopedias. Yeah. So now, Daniel, now you're writing a book on the subject. You have all this material on the subject of the PG film.
Well, it's been a long time coming, and I originally wrote a booklet called Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, and that got released in 1994, and then it was updated in 2003 with the bibliography added to it. And so this latest work I'm working on, which I either hope to have out later this year or early next year, possibly next year, because the elections are coming up in November, and that's kind of a big deal. Yeah. So I don't want someone or an event such as the election to have so much attention that my little thing does not get any attention.
Gotcha. Yeah,
So
of course.
you could think of the new project I'm working on, a pictorial history of the Patterson-Gimlin film, the Bigfoot at Bluff Creek on steroids. That's what you could think of it as. And so
Wow.
there will be information in that book that really nobody knows about, and photos that you've never seen that were taken by the late George Haas at the Patterson-Gimlin film site that have never seen daylight ever. So it is going to be a showcase of George Haas's photos and some of my in-depth journalistic skills at work for this production.
You know, do you still produce your newsletter out of your house?
Yes, I do.
Wow. I mean, this is an all-round incredible feat for sure.
So I can tell you right now that it takes so much time to fold the newsletter, to put it in the envelope, to do all of that clerical stuff, that I generally, because I can watch TV on the internet on my laptop computer, I generally just park the TV in front of me on the laptop, and I do it. I do things simultaneously, so it takes the better part of the day, many hours. You'd believe to stuff about 900 envelopes, it takes a long time if it's one person.
You're like one of those one-man bands with the drums and the horns and the cymbals and all going at the same time, you know?
Yeah, and so I've managed to pull that off for 26 consecutive years.
Woo! Well, you should be proud. You should be proud of that accomplishment for sure. Bill, did you want to ask Daniel about archiving and such?
Well, yeah, really one of the things that I wanted to mention that often gets overlooked is the importance of the archivists in our field. I mean, everyone always talks about the on the grounds researcher, which Daniel is both, from what I understand, and they, boots on the ground is important. But as Daniel talked, he's got basically records where he's the third generational holder of. And a lot of those records, we need to make sure that are maintained. I mean, one of the things that Thomas talks about is what's going to happen to his collection when he moves on. And I think this is Daniel's a perfect example of the archivists that are often unsung, that have a lot of information. Plus, the thing that Daniel does, which I really appreciate, is through the newsletter, he's giving that information out to the world. It's one thing to have an archive that you keep and don't share, quite another to have one that you make available to the world. And I just wanted to thank Daniel for doing that, because so much of that stuff could get lost if like you look at Rennie DeHinden stuff, all of it ended up in a tin, or most of it in a tin shed, rotted away in the Okanagan, that no one will ever see again. And and that's just a crime.
Yeah, so my plan is, I'm 61 years old, so when I exit the planet, my plan is to have in my trust that the entire collection of Bigfoot material, books, files, the whole 9 yards, plaster castings, will go to Stanford University with instructions, and they will carry out from there. So this way they will be preserved for another generation.
Glad to hear that. Because like I said, it's in my opinion anyways, it's an often overlooked aspect of the research. And it doesn't matter if Sasquatch is found out to be real tomorrow, or if it's nothing more than an interesting myth in North American history. It's the journey of discovering the phenomenon is worth keeping and worth preserving.
Oh, for sure. It's sort of like what Ted Prescott does with videos, where he archives those and collects them. And I say between Mr. Perez here and uh, Ted, is well, there are two of the mainstays of this whole thing about Sasquatch.
Yeah, and Todd just received a couple of months ago a collection from the East, from I can't remember the gentleman's name that passed away in the New York area. And again, it's
Bill Braun.
yes, right, you're correct. Of course, you're correct. But no, I mean, this is where we are taking this information and consolidating it from these various collections. It's good because, like, it's often stated that in Rennie DeHinden's collection, some people believed that the original copy of the PGF was taken by DeHinden. And I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think so. But it would just be a shame if that's where that original film wound up, in a shed, and it would be deteriorated to nothing. And I'm a big one for making sure that this history gets preserved and shared.
Let me just interject there for a moment about the original copy, the original camera film from the PG film, is that I had a discussion with Renee, and he and Bruce Bonney, who's still living, saw the film, had access to the film in 1980 in Los Angeles when that original film was here in Los Angeles. And what they did is they from the best frames of the film, which was determined by Bonney and DeHinden, because Bruce Bonney was a writer of I guess a surfer magazine and also a photographer. He had a 2.25 format camera, so he knew a lot about photography. And so the best frames from the film were turned into Cibachrome prints, which you see in the Man-Like Monsters on Trial book that was published by Halpin in 1980. And then it kind of gradually moved on to the internet, which you could pretty much find on the internet today. But he had access to it, and I asked him, and he said something to the effect that, he said, yeah, we checked it out and we turned it back in. And I made a comment. I said, did you ever think that because it was partially your property as a physical entity, about swapping it with a copy of the film? And he says, no, I didn't. But looking back, we probably should have. So he would have had the original in his hands, but he never did. He just had what you would call a master copy that was made for both him and John Green at the time in, I believe, late 1967 when that was made.
Yeah, he said the same thing to me, Danielle. We also got our hands on the Cibachromes when we published Meet the Sasquatch in 2004. Yeah.
Where and when did you two meet, Thomas?
I first met Daniel personally at the ISC, the defunct ISC symposium we had in Pullman in 1989, I believe. Yeah, that was the first conference since we ever had on the subject of the Sasquatch, since the 1978 Man-Like Monsters on Trial at the University of British Columbia. We all went down there to Pullman, brutally hot weekend, and I think I first met Danielle there. Yeah. And did that turn into a circus real quick? Because Beckford was arrested for allegedly threatening. God, his name just went out of my head. What?
Mark Francis.
Mark Francis, that's right. And we were all gathered around in a circle. I think you were in the circle too, Danielle, and with Green and Titmus and Paul Freeman and Freeman said something about his first encounter, and Titmus got real mad and said, God damn it, Paul, you change your damn story every time. It was really something. It really was. But the presentations were very well done and received for the most part. I thoroughly enjoyed it, though I wish that because of the heat they had to they had to keep the windows open all the time, and this circling airplane kept going over all the time. And you look at a lot of the videotape of that old symposium. Just as the speakers are going, you hear this noise of an aircraft going overhead all the time, but it was a good experience. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed meeting Danielle and Tim Collin, the fellow who claimed to have seen the original Minnesota Iceman who got burned in Hellemans and all them and interested in it. There was a lot of interesting people there, and it went off very well.
I just want to say hello to Trackway and hello to the tall ones and Sharon. And I don't think I missed any names there so far. Welcome aboard, boys. Good to see you. Yeah. And well, you've did your own investigations, Daniel, on many more popular encounters, did you not? Such as like Marble Mountain Memorial Day, the Redwood, Silver Star, Skookum Cast, on and on and on.
I was at the site of the Skookum Cast with Todd Neese just to see where the location was. I wrote about the Skookum Cast. In general, I'm not of the opinion that that was left by a Sasquatch, and I think it was more like elk in the country. On the topic of the Redwoods footage that was shot August of '95 in Northern California, not really too far from the PG film.
Jim Dutch State Park.
I went up to investigate in December of '95, and I was very impressed by that. On the question, the Marble Mountains, I had nothing to do with ever. I know that the videographer has passed on, but I wish I would have had enough time to at least interview him. That never transpired. But I mentioned to you early before the show started about the Crandall Lake incident, and I became aware of that by reading Tom Steenberg's book on the subject, and he was the first person to write it up in a book, and I was extremely impressed by it because there were 4 witnesses involved.
Yes, yes.
Actually, possibly more by the people leaving the campground. And so when I wrote my book, the juvenile book for juvenile readers about Bigfoot, past and present, I told the artists, I said, we should probably do the Crandall Lake campground incident where Sasquatch had come into the camp and the people were just absolutely petrified. So he did that artwork for it, and then I guess he was needed some extra cash, so he sold me the original, and which is right here. That is, can we see it okay? Am I?
Yeah.
Yep.
This is the original, and so I had it framed, and so that's the original image from the Crandall Lake campground that the artist did. And so it's in the book, but this is the original drawing.
Okay. I love myself.
So I happen to have some kind of one-of-a-kind things.
That is so cool. That is cool.
That is a cool drawing.
So Thomas knows more about the Crandall Lake situation than I do, but after reading it and then seeing these people on television talking about it, and the fact that they were I guess all of them were divorced from one another, and they still stuck with their story, I was more than 100% convinced that what they saw was a Sasquatch that had gone through camp.
Yeah. Well, Susan Ray Adams and Scott, they divorced, but the other couple, who were only a couple then, got married, and they have a literally platoon of kids. Yeah.
What year was that, Thomas?
1988, Victoria Day long weekend.
1988.
Site C3 Candle Campground, Waterton Lakes National.
Wow. Now I know both of you guys. I'm sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
I was just going to say on Thomas's YouTube channel, he does have the audio recordings that he took when he did the interview on that on his site. Unfortunately, Thomas was old school and cheap, and he reused tapes, so the recording's not the clearest, but it is there. It is there available, and it is quite interesting to listen to them actually hear the interview on the old school cassette tape that has the background noise and everything else.
And I just want to speak for myself and Daniel. Old school is not a bad term.
Okay.
The cheap part.
The cheap part is that's valid. That's valid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So everybody loves a PG film, the subject, whether they believe in the costume or whether it's actual zoological or whatever it is. But I just enjoy hearing the story over again, just right from the beginning and what motivated the characters. Because once again, the characters overshadow the creature itself. So, you know. So could you or Daniel maybe give us some background on what led to Patterson and Gimlin going to California to start with?
Well, they actually got delayed on their trip. And then they eventually made the trip because they were initially on the Labor Day weekend, they were up at the Mount St. Helens area, Bob and Roger, looking for Bigfoot. And they had tremendous rains there. So they packed up, went home. And then no sooner did that happen, they get a report from Northern California about 3 sets of tracks being seen up on Blue Creek Mountain, which is not very far, about 5 miles from the PG film site. And so they thought at least Roger thought that he needed to go down there to investigate, but he didn't have a ride. And so he recruited his friend, Bob Gimlin, and according to the newspaper, which is more likely correct, by the 10th, right around October 10th, they drove down to that area to investigate. And they settled in there, and for maybe about a week of riding, they had their sighting. And it's the best film from the sighting that we have ever captured. And it still is today. In fact, the PG film and the circumstances that surround it is by far and away the best evidence we've ever collected for the Sasquatch.
Indeed. And it might be interesting for you to note that there was supposed to be, with Roger and Bob, a third man, a man by the name of Jerry Lee Merritt, who was originally going to go down there with him. But he was fighting with his wife at the time, and she wouldn't let him go.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I read that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how many people lay plaster cast on Bluff Creek? I know Rene DeHinden did. I know Bob Titmus did.
No, he didn't. Roger Patterson cast 2 prints, and Titmus cast 10 in a row about 9 days later, or 9 of them at 10 days later.
Ah, I see.
Well, can I interrupt for a minute? So
Sure.
During the process of writing, when I originally wrote Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, I started in 1992, hoping to be finished by that year. Unfortunately, I was not. So October of 92 would be the 25th anniversary. But during that year, I was able to do a phone interview with John Green, with Bob Titmus, and several other people. But Bob Titmus sent down photos of the original castings, and he also sent on the photo on the backside there is writing on it, and I'll read to you what he said. And so to put it in better context is that at the time in question, there were very few people who had seen the original PG film. Bob Titmus just happened to be one of them. And he knew the Bluff Creek area pretty well because he was involved with stuff there in the late 50s with the Pacific Northwest expedition and with Jerry Crue as well. And so Bob Titmus at the time, I think, was living in British Columbia. And so he was at the original press showing for the film. So he had seen the film, met Roger and Bob, and was highly impressed, and made a decision to immediately fly down there to investigate. And so this is what he writes. And after I read to you what he wrote on the backside of a picture of some plaster castings, this is what he says. He says, 2 of the 10 plaster casts I made of the Bigfoot tracks on Bluff Creek about 10 days after Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin filmed Bigfoot on October 20th, 1967. These are some of the tracks Bigfoot made while being filmed. They had been rained on and show some deterioration. So it seems like a pretty easy statement to digest. However, what most people don't understand is Bob Titmus had a leg up on, say, anyone else who would want to go there. Not only did he know that there were tracks to be seen, but he had seen the film. And so by seeing the film, he was able to determine when he was making the castings that the castings he made of the footprints belonged to the sequence of when the subject was being filmed. And so what I'm saying, he had a cheat sheet by the fact that he had seen the film and then went down to the film site to make the castings. And he said, these plaster castings I'm making are part of the sequence where the animal was actually filmed.
So you're saying that Titmus was actually at the viewing at Al Diatley's home?
No. After the fact. He was not in Yakima, Washington. He was in Vancouver, British Columbia with John Green and other people to see the film there. And it was there that he had told me in the, I think it was the 1992 interview, that he said the morning after he had breakfast with Roger and Bob, and he said he was so impressed by them that he made an immediate decision to fly down to Northern California to investigate the matter firsthand.
Oh, okay. Okay, I was always under the impression that when everyone else was at Al Diatley's home to view the original showing of the Cam original film, Titmus went straight to the film site. And that's when he made his night. So you're saying he actually made those castings weeks later?
Yeah. So when there was 2 showings up in Vancouver, British Columbia.
That was weeks later. Yeah.
Yeah, that was about October 26th.
Yeah.
And so Bob Titmus was part of that. There was a scientific showing and a press showing, and I believe Bob Titmus was part of the press showing for the press.
Okay.
And so when he saw the film, he also has a recollection of not just seeing the Patterson Gimlin film, but seeing the second film of the tracks. The second film of the tracks on the ground has, for all intents and purposes, been lost. And so, like I said, he was so impressed. The next morning, he had breakfast with Bob and Roger, and he just said, you know what, I'm going to make a decision to go down there and see what I could find out firsthand. And when he found the film site, it was at the tail end of October, and that's when he made the 10 consecutive castings of the creature from the film. But lo and behold, I find out so here in Bob Titmus's original handwriting, he said, I made 10 consecutive prints. But this is what came up, and this is just what you would call a morsel of information that you don't know what to make of. So when they had the grand opening of the Willow Creek Museum in 2000, the year 2000, John Green was there. John Green's wife was there. Gertie Hugendorf, I think that's her name, either Bob Titmus's girlfriend or housekeeper, was there as well, and she cut the ribbon. And also Jeff Meldrum was there. But in 1967, I guess Bob Titmus either had a mistress or a girlfriend, or I'm not sure what the situation is. But John Green, and I never followed up on this, he made a passing comment. He said, oh yeah, I think Bob had given one of his girlfriends an original Patterson-Gimlin casting. So that would mean that in addition to the 10 which survived, there may have been an 11th that went to a woman who may have just tossed it in the trash can later on.
Mhm.
But that's what John said, and I really didn't have time to question him much at the time, and I never really followed up on that, only that I know that that's what he said. And so I said, wow, that's interesting.
Huh. Yeah.
So Thomas, can I ask you a quick question here? I've got this puppy here, which I think might have come from you originally. I don't think I got a couple from Bill Miller's, but this anyway, on the back it says Bluff Creek, October 20th, 1967, and it says copy Rene de Hinden. So, did Rene do his own cast, or did he make a copy of Titmus's cast? What would this be?
Actually that's a copy of one of the two that Roger Patterson himself cast the day of the filming.
Okay, so then he the original of this then is something that Patterson cast.
Correct.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
He only cast 2 tracks the day of the filming, at least as far as I know. One left foot, one right.
Yeah, I got the other one too. Other one.
When he shot his second roll of the tracks in the ground, you actually see one of his castings drying as it was still in the ground. Have you ever seen that second roll of film, Danielle?
No, just only what, just a short portion of it. And the last time I saw Rene at the Vancouver Gun Club, he said something to the effect that he was digging around with all his stuff and that he pulled out, I guess it was a 16 millimeter short strip of film about 10 feet. No, probably less than 10 feet, because I think he had it from arm to arm, and Rene was about 5 feet 8 inches tall.
Mm-hmm.
So his arm spread was probably around 5 foot 8 inches as well. But the film reached from end to end, and that short strip of film was a portion of the footprint film.
Right.
And he admitted to me at the time, he says, I'm not exactly certain how I got a hold of this, but when I was digging through my stuff, here it is. And so he had a portion of the second film of the footprints in the ground that Roger Patterson shot.
I only saw it, I believe, once. And that was on television. There used to be a show in the late 1960s called You Ask For It. And there was where people mailed in subjects and they do a talk and a documentary on it. And the Patterson Gibbon film was one of them. And they showed, as I recall, and this was like 68, 69. I was only a kid at the time. They showed the whole second row. You saw the tracks in the ground. You saw Bob Gibbon jump from a stump. And the show was called You Asked For It. And I've never, ever been able to find that on the internet anywhere. Any episode of that show. It's like it never existed. But I remember it well, because I remember watching the episode they did on the Loch Ness Monster at one time as well. And they showed the famous film from 1960-61. It was a great show, but it's never been, no one's ever posted copies of it anywhere as far as I know. Yep.
So how did they transport the film so fast and get it developed in the time that they did?
That's pretty easy. It was charter plane from just north of Eureka at Murray Field, from Murray Field to Yakima. And Aldi Atlee, Roger Patterson's brother-in-law, picked it up. And if you read, for the people who are intent about reading and really digesting what they read, especially in a book, not a Kindle, because it's hard to, I don't know, I'm not big on Kindle, but to me, it's hard to wrap your mind around something that's not physical. With a book, you could get physical with it in the sense that you could write in it and stuff. And so if you look at Greg Long's book about the PG film, he has an interview with Al Diatley, who's since passed away. And so Al Diatley admits there that Roger had called him and they wanted to get those films, as in plural, film of the creature, film of the tracks, to get processed up in Yakima, or to get them to Al Diatley so he can have them processed. And so he mentions the word finance, to have that financed. And so if you take the position that they were mailed via the United States Postal Service, that's something at the time in 1967 that may have cost you maybe max, maybe $5. And I think between Roger and Bob, they would have $5. But to rent an airplane, to charter an airplane, that's probably something beyond their means. And so Al Diatley financed that trip to have those films shot up to him. So he got them probably no later than the early morning of October 21st and spent all of October 21st, Saturday, having those films processed. And then by October 22nd, Sunday, they see the original films at Al Diatley's home in his basement.
And just for your information, the film was processed at the Ford Motion Picture Lab at 306 Fairview Avenue, North Washington. And I found that out because the late Bill Miller went in there for a completely different reason in the year 2000. And the subject of Bigfoot came up, and the old guy working there said, "Oh, yeah, we developed that movie here. We showed it on the wall." "Oh, tell me about it." Well, the first guy who came in was a businessman. He gave us some money, and we developed it for him. And a few weeks later, a little cowboy showed up to have copies made. Roger Patterson. So it was filmed at it was developed at the Ford Motion Picture Lab at 306 Fairview Avenue, North Seattle, Washington. And you still get people today on the internet saying, "Where was the film developed?" Well, that's where it was developed.
Yeah,
What I don't know is, did Al Diatley receive the film in Yakima and drive it to Seattle, or did he meet the plane in Seattle and have it developed? I'm not sure which.
Yeah,
Well,
I got a video of Diatley plugging the Patterson Gimlin film, and Todd Prescott has the same video too, and I talked to him about it. I don't recall where he got it from, but he said he can't use it on his site because he's afraid of copyright infringement. So I don't know who the original owner of that film was.
is it a private film?
Yes. It starts off with Diatley sitting at a desk, and then he starts going into the spiel about Bigfoot and everything like that. And
well, that's part of a film documentary.
Yeah, the one made in late '60s, wasn't it? It had Roger Patterson riding Peanut in it, and he's talking about how they got the film.
Patterson came in on the tail end of it because Todd wanted to verify we were talking about the same video. He said, "Describe the ending to me." And I said, "Well, you just see Patterson riding up on this horse, and he gets off the horse and he starts talking to the camera. And I don't remember what he said to the camera. And then about 30 seconds, 40 seconds later, that was the end." So Todd said, "Yeah, we got the same video."
Yeah.
He said he's been wanting to put it in the archives, but wherever he got it from, he can't get copyright permission or whatever to put it in. So
it's on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not.
On the internet, I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I put it up myself, but I already got one strike against me. So I'm not going to tempt fate. They destroy you for no reason at all. You don't need to give them a reason.
People say, they had to use the Kodachrome 2 process to get it developed. They couldn't have got it developed so fast. Let me tell you something. Back in the late 60s, men with money and influence, and Al Diatley was, always went and had money under the table to have other types of movies produced under the table. Yeah, so if you had money, you had influence, you could get it done. And Al Diatley had both. Oh, and by the way, I don't know, Daniel, you ever talked to him. Al Diatley was the most evasive, egotistical individual I ever spoke to. I mean, I really came off not liking the guy. I really did. He would never answer a question directly. Never. One of my biggest concerns about the authenticity of the Paris Gibbon film was, is Aldi Atley going to say something or make a confession when he knew the end was near? But apparently he didn't. And of course, his house and everything was seized by the government because he was in such tax trouble.
There's no happy ending to any of this, is there?
I'd like to get some clarification from Danielle, if that's okay. What you were saying earlier, that Titmus, what it went, and this is kind of the part I was trying to zero in on. I had kind of a couple of questions, but my brain's trying to make sure it gets it in order so people at home can follow it. Did you say that Titmus went and talked to Bob and Roger directly, and that's what made him fascinated by what he had told him?
That's correct. And I think that was October 26th in Vancouver, British Columbia at the Hotel Georgia. And so they were in the same room, Bob Gimlin, Roger Patterson, and Bob Titmus, John Green, and many other people. And so it was at that premiere showing, or second premiere showing, that Bob became acquainted with both Roger and Bob Gimlin. And he told me during an interview, I believe in October of 1992, when I did a taped interview with him for my Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, that he said I had breakfast with him the next morning. And he said something to the fact that he was so impressed by them and their sincerity that he immediately dropped everything and flew to Northern California to investigate the matter firsthand, to see if he could look at the tracks, because he felt he was very impressed by the film of the subject of Patty. So he wanted to go down there and look at the tracks because he felt he was better at being a tracker. Although on the first, he says he admits that on the first full day up there, he overshot the tracks, and it was on the second day that he actually found the tracks. And he said that he was very impressed by the tracks, and he felt that looking at the tracks told him the tale that this is a genuine film. The tracks in the film complemented one another. And so his castings came at the tail end of October. So in the month of October, there were only two people that I know of that are on record who made plaster of Paris castings on the film site: Roger Patterson and Bob Titmus.
Okay,
and
the
in
second part of
between, go ahead.
The second part of the question, I'm just trying to follow, because I'm sure you've heard the idea that at one point Roger and Bob kind of had their outs, and Bob, you probably heard this. Now I can't tell anymore what's rumor and what's not rumor anymore, because everyone seems to be aligned with whatever they want to believe. So I'm kind of trying to get to the source. When the movie came out, there was this idea that's out online that Bob moved away from Roger because he didn't want to hang out with him on that. Now, was this the same time? Is this after the event when Roger pulled away, or Bob pulled away from Roger, that Titmus sat down with him, or was this before the time? Meaning that
before.
Okay.
Just think of it that Bob Titmus sat down with Roger and Bob probably on, if they saw the movie October 26th, it was the morning after October 27th. And probably by October 27th, he was on a plane headed to Northern California.
Okay, and that was Titmus that was Titmus on the way down there, right? To go investigate.
Correct. From Vancouver to Eureka, and then from Eureka out to the woods.
So from your background knowledge of this, when was that when Bob and kind of pulled away from Roger? What was that, a month after, or 2 months after, 7 months after, a year after?
I'm not exactly certain, but initially,
have you heard that?
Yeah, that's common knowledge. Initially, it was kind of like a three-way partnership between Aldi Atley, Roger Patterson, and Bob Gimlin. But so Bob was supposed to be part of this enterprise, but he felt that between Al and Roger that he was being cheated out of his share, his 1/3 share. And so that eventually led to a lawsuit after Roger Patterson died against Patricia Patterson. And so that's how that happened. But Bob Gimlin did not have the time to go on the road with them to promote the film. He had to get back to work. And so that's how they kind of had the falling out. And actually, if you think it's a fake film, and Bob Gimlin knew something about it, and they had a falling out, he would have said something. He would have said, "Yeah, I was involved in faking the film or whatever," but he never ever says something like that.
It was more of a falling out between Bob Gimlin and Al DiAtley that caused that split than anything else. And another reason for it was on the original showing at Al DiAtley's house, Bob Gimlin wasn't there. He was exhausted because he did all the driving and everything, and he was just exhausted. He saw the movie there the following night, and he expressed his disappointment in it. He said, "What I saw on the film screen was not nearly as good as what I saw with the naked eye." And Al DiAtley seemed to get mad at that, was upset by that. And he kind of started pushing Bob Gimlin out of the thing right from that point on, really. Even I hired an actor to pretend to be him on stage presentations.
Yeah, that's why my question was there.
So yeah.
There's kind of an overlap of data that people keep meshing together all the time in this whole topic. So it's really hard to get.
And Bob said just before Roger died, they had a sort of a recollection, and they became friends again just before Roger died, because Roger died in 1974, or excuse me, 72. Yeah.
What did he die from?
Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Mm.
Yeah.
And just on that note, Daniel and Thomas, often you hear on different forums that Roger did a deathbed confession that the film was a hoax, which I know we all know is not the case. But if you guys have any background information on where that rumor first came up or how it first came up, where do you think it came from?
Someone wanting to write a book. That's where most of them come from.
Well, I think originally it came from a newspaper article, but I want to let the two archivists that have been in it for a million years, if they have better knowledge of it.
To my knowledge, there was never a deathbed confession by Roger Patterson about the film.
No, matter of fact, there have been several sources through the years that said Roger Patterson made a deathbed confession. They don't even agree with each other when he said it.
Well, there'd have to be some agreement of time because he was on his deathbed for a short time. It's not like it would be years apart. It would be days or maybe weeks apart. But no, I believe it came from a meeting, at least between Bob, the meeting between Bob and Roger shortly before he died, where there was supposedly an apology from Roger to Bob about
that's correct,
how he had treated him. And I think people have converted that story into the hoax story to support their own agenda. But I was wondering if you guys had any more information than that.
No.
Okay, back to you, Leon.
Well, I do have a secondary thought. I was kind of curious because Daniel, you're saying you're writing this, you have this newsletter, and right across the board, newspapers are basically out the window, and the way the online world's going is people would rather hear visual stuff and documentary stuff, or not documentary, documented stuff, and even I find that hard as dealing in academic world to find out sources that are actually academically solid. This is kind of what you were talking earlier about getting information and data out there into the world. But the problem is not many people are using the same strategy as us old men over 60, except for Bill, I think, are interested in. So, for instance, I had I think I've worked on eight books, I think, this year, and the authors are all saying the same things to me. What's the use of writing a book? No one reads anymore. They'd rather go online and get access that way. So my question, in a way, is: so if you have good information, it's important to get good information. But if the society is moving towards, the information just being online, so none of it's vetted. That's what you do. Thomas Bose do that very well. Is you vet everything out, but the access to the vetting is so limited. I know your padded answer would be, well, that's why you should get a prescription for my magazine, 100%. But in the long run, I don't know if it's going to be a winning battle, because we're going to lose some of that when you're talking about the history of having a place where it could be sorted, vetted, and kept in check so that people can have access to it. It's going to be harder and harder to get that online. So my curious question is, are you thinking in the future of putting some of your stuff online so it's accessible to that audience, which probably outnumbers your audience 1,000 to 1?
If you go to my website, bigfoottimes.net, all the covers of the newsletters are online. So you could see all the covers. You could see one page of the newsletter online from 1998 through 2024, but you can't see the rest.
Right. So you still have access online by becoming a member, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, even if you get a membership to the Bigfoot Times, you're still not going to have anything access online. You're going to get a postal mail every month with the newsletter in it. That's how you get it.
Right.
So the formula, let's just put it this way. The formula I came up with 26 years ago still works, because people are still subscribing to the newsletter and asking for back issues. So why change it?
So if I was a member, just for people watching, so if I was a member of your subscription, can I request those back sheets? Am I going to have to pay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have to pay a fee for the access to them?
No.
Okay.
When you say to access them, you're going to get the back issues in the mail, in the postal mail, just like you get the current edition. It's not like you're going to go online to access them. You're going to access them when you open an envelope, and they're in your envelope, the newsletters, the physical newsletters.
Right. So is there a double fee for that, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yes, because you're buying back issues of the newsletter.
No, it's fine. I'm just trying to, so people understand where you're coming from. Because a lot of people would say, well, this is just not a money issue. It's like, no, the guy's done the research, pay him his dues. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people.
The back issues, because, you have to get an envelope, you have to get postage, you got to get the issues together. Sometimes you have to reprint the back issues to get it. So, yeah, they're all physical, but yeah. There's a fee involved.
No, I just want to make sure that people kind of get that, and that the reason for that is you've done your dues. It's kind of like saying, okay, I've invented the Dairy Queen product, but I'm never going to charge anybody anything for it after you have one Dairy Queen product. It's like, no. I still came up with.
So how many given back issues at a time do you have laying around? I'm sure there must be some that there's probably only one or two copies still left.
Yeah, but the thing is, I have the originals, and from the masters of the newsletters, I could make more copies.
As needed, yeah.
On an as-needed basis. At the present time, we have someone in Saskatchewan. Let me see if I think it's Sasquatch. I think it's that province. His name is Anthony Rogosoic or something like that, but he has been ordering like $50 of back issues at a time, and then I've been keeping track, and he says, I want to get them all, and he says, this is how I can afford it if I do it like this, and so he's on this mission to get them all.
You could use a whole bunch more like him.
Yeah.
So Daniel, Joe Dryden, he's in one of our in our chat. He wants to know what does it cost for a back issue.
You've got to get, I think I'd have to go to the Bigfoot Times. I think it's $1.50 for a back issue. But you have to order, I think, about 5 of them or whatever. I'd have to look at what I have on the Bigfoot Times net website. But if you go to bigfoottimes.net, you'll see like you just can't get one. You need to order maybe 5 to make it worth my time.
And do you have a master list? Say if somebody was interested in a specific subject, that they could go to your website, type in, just say the PGF film, just go PGF film, and then that would go and show them all the issues that you discussed that in, or
right. So George Eberhardt has kept the Bigfoot Times index from 1998 through 2024, and you go to the Bigfoot Times index, which is on the website, and you could see like, oh, look at all this stuff on the PG film or the Freeman film or whatever. I want to get all those back issues. So yeah, you could zero in on what you're looking for.
excellent. Good to hear that. So in addition to your Bigfoot Times, on your website, do you have any other archival material that you share, like
there's
photos or anything like that?
No, because there's other websites who have all of that stuff that is unique to their website. My website is unique to me and what I'm doing. On the bigfoottimes.net website, you can access a bibliography on the PG film that is far and away the biggest thing ever assembled, and it's a PDF document that you open up. And there's also a PDF document, a bibliography on the Ape Canyon incident from 1924. And you just click on that link right there, and you can see the bibliography of what was published. On the PG film, just the bibliography alone is over like 30 pages. And so now that Thomas had mentioned to me the show about You Asked for It and about seeing the second roll of the footprints from the PG film, I want to research that and see if I could find something, because then I will add that You Asked for It to the bibliography.
So I'm glad you actually brought that up, Daniel, because I think that shows another important feature of your research and your website, is that somebody that wanted to independently research and just didn't want to get the Daniel Perez view of it, they can go there, go to those bibliographies, see the firsthand, whether go to the primary source, secondary source for that information, and research themselves. And Leon comes from the academic world and knows the importance of primary and secondary source material. So I think making that available to the general public is another service that you provide that maybe is not thought of that often.
Yeah, so the bibliography on the PG film is simply massive, and it's there on the bigfoottimes.net website. And anybody who can access that website can access that bibliography and see the vast amount of literature that has been published on the topic.
Excellent.
I want to just jump in here for 1 second and change the subject over to another project that Daniel worked on some time back with a partner of his. And I just wanted to present it to you guys in the audience, because I think it's something well worth looking into. And that is this book right here called Bigfoot Encounters Past to Present. Now you can get this on Kindle if you want. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it. And this is a book that got, as it says, some well-known encounter cases and some not so well-known encounter cases. And I read the book. I have the book. I highly recommend it. I think it's a great gift for somebody who's involved in this or who has an interest in it. It's a light read. It's only 100 odd pages long or something, and it's well worth the price. believe me. And also with this is you get these sketches. There's Jerry Cruz with he's Humboldt Times picture or whatever, showing the cast, and it's about the PG
It
incident.
almost looks like he's raising his leg and it's his foot.
Could be. I got stinky foot. Yeah. And these are the Sierra Sound guys, Barry and can't think of the other guy's name at the moment.
Ron Moorhead.
Ron Moorhead, thank you. Ron Moorhead, yes. And this is the story of the Sierra Sounds. And also, this is the Redwoods. It goes by another name in the book, but it's the Redwood film about the creature that crosses the road in front of an RV. And also something you've heard from Thomas many a time, the Crandall Campground incident in Alberta. This is just a sampling of what's in the book. And I really advise you to go check it out. Hey, just go to Amazon, check it out, and you won't be disappointed. It's I highly recommend it. Anyway,
Just on that. Sorry, I just interrupted for a sec, Jerry. Hey, Daniel, is any of your books, are they available through your website, or is it all through third-party vendors like Amazon?
Third-party vendors. The book I'm working on right now will probably be exclusively available from me alone, not Amazon. Initially, you have to go through me to get the book.
Well, when it's written, please keep us in the loop, because I'm sure it's going to be an excellent book worthwhile reading.
Well, we have some people that will be getting review copies who've over the years have sent me review copies of their books. So I'll be sending them review copies of this book, and they will be the initial reviewers. And when they put their word out there to the social media outfits, that's how the book will become very well known. They'll say, you've got to get this book, or whatever the case may be. I think you're just going to be floored once it's out.
I think it's something to look forward to. Definitely.
I have another question. I have the obvious question. How did you get involved with this? Unless you already answered it, I missed it. Why? Did you have an encounter?
No. In 1973, I saw the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. I was about 10 years old, and it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. Initially, I guess at 10 years old, I didn't know whether to believe it or not to believe what was going on in Fouke, Arkansas, which is where the movie was based, or the Fouke monster. And somehow, within months or a year, I went to the library and kind of figured out what they were talking about was essentially Bigfoot. And so that's what got me going. The movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek.
That's a scary movie.
That movie destroyed a lot of lives in our age bracket and sent us down very bad paths. I think all five of us got our start
as a kid
watching that movie.
Yeah,
as a kid, I was already interested. And that's why I went to see the movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek. I paid to see it the first time, but my cousins and I had a way of sneaking into the same theater through the ventilation system. I must have went in there and saw it another 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. Boy.
I can say that now. That theater doesn't exist anymore. They tore it down.
Yeah. Can we have a discussion about Albert Ostman?
Absolutely.
We can talk about anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, this is the Daniel Perez guest.
This is the Daniel Perez show.
So the Albert Ostman alleged abduction occurred in 1924 in British Columbia. And so he's the only witness. So it's all based on his word as to what happened. But one thing about it that would come up later and I had frequent discussions about this, and this is from an anatomy perspective, is that at the time, Albert Ostman was just a construction worker that probably didn't have a whole lot of education. And he described the big male that he had seen because he says he was taken captive by 4 of them, a big male, presumably its mate, the female, and 2 kids, a male and a female kid. And he said the hand of the subject, if I could put my hand up here, he said it had a very big palm and short, stubby fingers. And so the question is, that's what he claimed to have seen. And so that by itself is just an observation. And let's say, for instance, he was making this up. And say, for instance, he had seen some scary movie where they had put a person with big, long fingers and spikes on the end, or whatever the case may be. So you would think that if he were making it up, it would be a very scary hand. Instead, he says the hand that he saw was a very big palm, a very elongated palm, and short, stubby fingers, not so much in relationship to my hand or anyone else's hand. And so that's 1924. And then if you fast forward from British Columbia to February of 1962 to Fort Bragg, California, there was another incident there that happened. And in that case, the witness stated that there was a muddy handprint that was left on the door sill, which is where the door comes in contact with the framework around it. And that hand from the base of the palm to the top of the fingertip was right around 11 inches, which is simply a massive hand. And again, you see there that the palm is extremely elongated and the digits, the fingers, are very short and stubby. And so you start to wonder about Albert Ostman. He did not have the luxury of knowing about the Fort Bragg incident because that happened after the fact, not before the fact. So he didn't have any framework to make up his story. So I'm saying, what if he actually saw what he claimed to have seen, and this is what he saw in terms of this primate with a big extended palm and very short stubby fingers? And then if you look at the data, we've had frequent discussions in the newsletter Bigfoot Times about this. There's a case in Michigan that comes up, I think in 1978, that the late Wayne King investigated. And one of these things came onto their farm. They didn't see it, but it got into their shed and I guess broke open the feed and left on the camper shell, which was away from the truck, but was sitting on some wood, and it left a dusty handprint on the wood, on the camper shell. And again, this is in Michigan, probably 1978. What you see, the photo that Wayne King shot, you have a big extended palm and short stubby fingers. So it's very unlikely that this couple that lived on this farm had any inkling who the people were in Fort Bragg or who Albert Ostman was. And then as I was researching some other stuff that Lyle Blackburn had brought to the public, he's a researcher from Texas, there was a case near Fort Worth where they were having frequent incidents, and I want to say this is the late 1960s. And this guy says he was camping by himself, and that I guess he was being pulled out, or there was a disturbance, and he got up and looked, and he saw for all the world a Bigfoot right there in front of him. And he described it to the newspaper at the time, and he had specific anatomical features that he mentioned. And he said, what I saw had a very long palm and short stubby fingers. And so when you start to do the data mining and you see these incidents from Texas to Michigan to California to British Columbia, with Albert Ostman being the original, it's hard for me to imagine that this one guy made it up and all of these people copied him. It seems to me that the more logical and reasonable answer is that these eyewitnesses saw a physical animal and they described it as it is, as it was. And so that's probably the case where the typical Sasquatch has a very long extended palm and very short stubby fingers. And so that's why I bring up Albert Ostman, because I know that one of your Canadian colleagues, John Kirk, thinks that Albert Ostman was a hoaxer. And I don't feel the same way. I don't feel the same way about it at all, because where would Albert Ostman come up with this anatomical details about his hand? He didn't have any framework to frame it. And so when I spoke with John Green about it, John and June Green said that Albert Ostman was a guest at their home on several trips, on several times, and they felt that he was being very honest about what he had seen. Rene DeHinden was a big fan of Albert Ostman initially, but later in life, he said something to the effect that maybe Albert Ostman was just a storyteller. And I think maybe that was just Rene being Rene, expressing his skepticism. But my take about Albert Ostman, it's that one specific detail about him describing the hand, and you could read it in his own writing in John Green's original book, On the Track of the Sasquatch, which was published in '68, is that's how he describes the hand. And so you would wonder, like, why wouldn't he just describe a hand just like a person's hand, but bigger? If you were just making something up, you would just enlarge a person and put hair on it and say, like, oh, the hand was just like a person's, but bigger. But he specifically said that the palm was a very big palm and very short, stubby fingers. And so why would he say that?
Well, it's interesting because Albert Ostman made several observations about the creatures, like the one he called the old lady had a rather goose-like walk that he stood out, and I've heard that described in other incidents before. But I could tell you what I did. I mean, if we have time here,
go.
In the 80s, I tried to. In his original story, he came after he got away. He only got away from it. He only wandered through the woods for one day and one night before he came out into a logging operation, the salmon arm of Shell Inlet. And he claimed in his original story he never told what happened to him. He just said he was a prospector and got lost. Well, I had the idea. I took a look at logbooks from 3 different logging operations that were operating in the Salmon Arm and then the general Shell Inlet area in 1924, and none of them mentioned coming across a lost prospector in the fall of and summer of 1924. However, I also found out there were over 14 logging operations going on in the general Salmon Arm of Shell Inlet in 1924, and hardly any of them even bothered to keep logbooks. So it's just possible the 3 I looked at were not the ones that he ran into. Another thing that always bothered me about the story was when he went into Toba Inlet, he said he was boated to the head of Toba Inlet by an old Indian gentleman that he spent the first night with him and was supposed to come back and pick him up in 3 weeks. Okay. Now, according to his original story, when they were driving in there, the subject came up and the old Indian actually uses the word Sasquatch. Well, that's not possible in 1924 since the name was not coined until 1929.
Good point.
Well, there is some debate about that. There's been a recent book that came out, and I just wish I could remember the name of it, where they attribute the term Sasquatch to an early ethnologist that was on the BC coast here in the late 1800s that used the term Sasquatch. And I did email the author asking for their source material. They never got back to me. But Thomas, and I think I mentioned it to you, Thomas.
Yeah, I know.
So, I mean, it until we can actually try to get to the source material of that original author,
Mhm.
we do have that it is possible that Sasquatch was termed before that, and then of course the other option could be when he was telling the story, it was at a later date, and the term Sasquatch had come out, and he just may have thought, remembering back, that's what he said.
Yeah, I said I know because by the time Albert Ostman told this story, Sasquatch was a household word in British Columbia because he came up with this story in 1957 during the BC bicentennial. That's when John Green Rennie Hurden first talked to him. Now, another thing is the old Indian gentleman who spent the night, he was supposed to come and pick him up in 3 weeks. I always wondered what did that old Indian gentleman do when he went back and couldn't find him. Did he report him? So I had a charming woman in the old provincial archives in Victoria, because the RCMP were not active in British Columbia back then. We had our own provincial police force. And boy, were they spread thin. I said, were there any reports? And she was looking in the archives for me of missing persons in and around Toba Inlet in 1924. She said, yes, one, a fishing boat, several men drowned. It's the only one she could find. She looked for a week for me. Did a great job. Said no mention of it, but it could possibly. But she said, don't read too much into that. We've had fires, we've had floods, we've had all kinds of stuff disappear over the decades. So I just said she couldn't find anything. Yeah.
What year
And
did
the reason why John Kirk thinks that, Daniel, is because he thought he found evidence that maybe Albert Ostman wasn't even in British Columbia in 1924. I'm still waiting for him to clarify that.
Well, I know that he's written some stuff in his newsletter, and I think you've got to get away from that, and you got to get back to what he claims to have seen. And again, my question is, if he saw this big monster, say he said it was 8 feet tall or whatever, just hairy like a man, why would he say the hand was so different than a man's hand, a modern man's hand? Yeah. Why would he say that the palm was extended and the fingers were stubby? That comes up in Texas, in California, and then in Michigan on different incidents. And it's, what is the likelihood that all four of these eyewitnesses knew about one another? During that time period, there was no internet, unless the person in Michigan was an avid reader of Bigfoot information and they decided to fake all of their stuff. The camper in Texas knew about the Fort Bragg stuff and he decided to fake everything. And the Fort Bragg guy knew about Albert Ostman and decided that he would fake everything, just like Albert Ostman, because Albert Ostman said it had a big palm and short, stubby fingers. And so that's a real question. Mm-hmm. So why would Albert Ostman say that specific detail about the hand? And he was very specific about that. And so he said the hand was not like a person's, it was different. And so that theme pops up again in February of 1962 on the coast, Fort Bragg, California, by an eyewitness who had seen the thing. And they said it left this big muddy handprint on the door sill trying to get into their house. And again, if you look at that muddy handprint that was published in John Green's book, it's a big long palm and short stubby fingers. And it's just like, I mean, you could play the devil's advocate and say like, oh yeah, the people in Fort Bragg knew about Albert Ostman and they decided to fake their report just like Albert Ostman.
Yeah. That's a curiosity.
Well, it's an interesting observation, that's for sure. I mean, the unfortunate thing about Albert Ostman, it's a classic tale and it's doomed to be nothing more than that. Yeah.
Well, I just wish that someone at the time when it happened or when he came out with it, I guess was probably the late 1950s.
57.
That not just John Green, but other people would have went and interviewed them like on a reel-to-reel tape to get his own words from more than one source to say, like, can you please tell me what happened on this alleged incident?
Mhm.
And so we really have just his writing, and maybe there is some recordings that Albert had made mention in one of the early Bigfoot documentaries. And he sounds okay, but you don't know the person just by watching him on television. I think John Green and his wife June may have been the people that knew him the best, and it was John's opinion that he was the real deal.
Oh yeah, John was absolutely convinced. So was Renee, quite frankly. Albert Ostman, John. I don't know if he showed these to you, but he showed them to me. Albert Ostman had fancied himself a writer, and they had a whole collection of scribblers of stories written by Albert Ostman. They're terrible. I mean, they're the logger fell in love with the pretty girl and she was really nice, and that kind of thing. And that's because he had a very thick accent. That's the way he wrote. But his encounter with the Sasquatch reads more like a journal entry rather than a storytelling. And all those others were just story, and always the same thing. Loggers fall in love with pretty girls in town, that kind of thing. And they were just awful. But this one stood out. It's all like a journal entry. Did he show you the Albert Ostman scribbler?
I may have seen it once.
Yeah, it's fascinating reading. And boy, he had almost a feminine hand too in his writing. He had a very neat writer. Boy, I was impressed.
I mean, it's one of the early reports where there's
Yeah.
enough anatomical detail in there that would at least make your head scratch.
Mhm.
But I'll be the first to admit that there's a lot of things about the story in general that also make your head scratch, because I guess he thought the first night when he had disturbance in his camp that he thought maybe it was a porcupine, and he made a decision that he would put his gun in his sleeping bag and his shoes at the bottom of the bag and just be prepared. Instead, he gets picked up and carried away. And isn't it convenient that when he gets dropped off, he has his rifle with him?
And it's convenient. Not only carried him, it decided to pick up his backpack that was hanging on a tree branch and bring that along too.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm not Albert Ostman. I wasn't there to witness any of it, but on the surface, it's a beyond belief report. I'll be the first to admit this, because the witness has no physical evidence that this actually happened, and had he really wanted to make a statement, even in 1924. He could have went to the authorities or whomever and said, like, this really happened. I'll show you where it took place. Let's go back and find that area where it happened. But instead, he didn't do that. And I guess maybe the climate at the time was such that you don't talk about these things. It's taboo. And so maybe that's why he just kept his mouth shut. And it didn't, like I said, it didn't come out till 1957. But in John Green's book, Sasquatch, the Apes Among Us, that was published in 1978, John Green does make an admission. He said that Albert Ostman did mention it to a few people from between 24 and 1957.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, John Green said in an earlier trip, even before he ever met Albert Ostman, he was up sailing around the Toba Inlet area, and the subject Sasquatch came up, and some guy said, well, some foreign guy got kidnapped by a bunch of them here a while ago. So this fellow, even before he even met Albert Ostman, seemed to know the Albert Ostman story, if that's what he was talking about. Yeah.
That probably is. That probably is. And I guess it was in 1957 that there's a newspaper clipping of it, and I have a photocopy where there's a pretty decent picture of Albert Ostman where he gave a public presentation. And again, wouldn't it be wonderful had someone in that audience had a reel-to-reel tape recorder to memorialize exactly what he said? The newspaper talks a little bit about it, but it's not actually Albert Ostman's own words. So a lot of that original report is kind of lost to history. But the Albert Alsman story is very unique in the sense that it's not often that an eyewitness says that they were physically abducted by one of these things and taken to a camp where they actually lived and to observe them as they were going about their daily living. And it just, if it's true, then we've learned a little bit about a Sasquatch and their lifestyle, that maybe they do form small family groups, and maybe the big male had an idea that maybe Albert Ostman could be a mate for its daughter. I don't know, but I think he alluded something to that in his report, that he thought maybe that I was going to be the mate for the daughter. And
that's what he theorized. Well, he said she never came anywhere near me.
and then there's another report. If you go to Peter Burns' book from 1975, the same year in 1924, another individual by the name of Harry Muchalot, I think if I'm saying the last name correct.
Mucklot Harry is what they call
Yeah, the claims that he was abducted, I think the same year in the state of Washington. And his is a little bit more fantastic. I tend to believe that Ostman's story is maybe more grounded in the truth, but it is interesting to know that.
Was that Washington? I thought it was Vancouver Island in British Columbia.
I think you're correct. Yeah. And this it's another interesting report. And there was a father, I think. When I say a father, I'm talking about religion. That a father had heard Harry's Muchalot or Muchalot Harry. I can't remember which is his first and last name.
Mucklock Harry, he used to go by.
Yeah. And
Mucklock Harry.
He had heard the story, and he said, I think I heard somewhere down the line that he was favorably impressed by that report as well. But I just find it interesting that same calendar year in 1924, two individuals here on the West Coast claimed that they were abducted. And I don't think either of these gentlemen knew one another. And back in 1924, it's not like you have social media and you don't get on your cell phone and call someone up. It was a much different world.
Can
I interrupt for just a sec?
Sure.
Okay, just for the people on our audience, one reason you would hide the rifle and shoes in the sleeping bag if porcupines are around is porcupines are notorious chewers. They will chew up a gun stock given the opportunity, and they're also like raccoons. They will pack off shoes into the bush if they're around. So, it's because of the porcupine chewing, I'm assuming, would be a reason for him to put his firearm inside the sleeping bag. That doesn't take away some parts of his other story, but it's just, if anyone was wondering why a porcupine would make him put his shoes into the sleeping bag.
See, I know what John Kirk has done on the matter in terms of his idea that Albert Ostman was a hoaxer. And I know that he got in touch with the family and he got some family photos. And I find it interesting. And I know that, I guess he stated that during that time period, Albert Ostman may have been out of the country or some other stuff. And he said something like in his writing, in his newsletter, something to the effect that, isn't it convenient that all of this is happening almost simultaneously? Is everyone okay back there? But the only thing I would like to ask John Kirk is there a smoking gun that would prove that the Albert Ostman story is fabricated? That's what I would want to know. And if there was, then we could safely put aside the Albert Ostman story. But in my mind, as an investigator and researcher, it's still very, very much alive.
Oh, we can never put aside the Albert Ostman story because it's one of the classic tales. It'll always be that.
And because Albert Ostman preceded me, his time period was much, much more before mine. That would be one of the people that I would love to go back in time and to have met him and sat down with him to hear his story. I never had that. I think he died in 1975. So technically I could have met him, but I don't even think in 1975 I knew who he was.
Yeah, he passed away in 77. Yeah.
Yeah.
He lived in Fort Langley here, just 20 minutes down the road from me. And we found his grave. He's buried in Fort Langley. Yeah. Interesting fellow.
Yeah. I just think, I mean, back then when his story was ripe for the pickings, I guess people did not have the presence of mind, or if they did, it hasn't surfaced to do, because back then they had reel-to-reel recordings, to sit down with them and say, like say an ethnographer or a cultural anthropologist who got wind of the story, to spend an evening or a weekend with Albert Ostman to say, like, hey, I think you're full of shit, but I'd like to record your story anyway. Tell me what happened from point A to point Z. And it really never got done. So his words, we've got some of the story down, but his exact words coming out of his own mouth, say on a reel-to-reel tape, we never got down. So this is why when I encounter eyewitnesses who I think are worthy of more than just listening to, I try to record what has transpired. And I will admit that last year, I believe, I was in Missouri to give a talk, and a gentleman in the camp came up to me by the name of Patrick Perry. He never saw one, but he claims that he heard one. And he just kind of came right up to me and started just firing away about this report. And it was just incredible. He said that he was out hunting with a bow and arrow. And that night, the sounds came in and he was in a blind. And he said that whatever was making these sounds obviously knew where he was. And he thought to himself that something along the lines that, because he didn't have a gun, but he had a bow, he says one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to be able to get my bow and arrow, get one good shot off, and after that, I'm probably going to die. Or I just stay in this blind and cry and just hope for daylight. And he made it through daylight, and the next day he was up. But when I got back home, I called him up and I did a taped interview with him. And he says there's nothing out there in the woods in Ohio. Let's see. It was either Ohio or Missouri that makes a sound like what he heard. And it's just an incredible report.
And I think, Daniel, that again goes back to my point earlier about the importance of archivists, and that are just not boots on the ground. And I think that's where John Green sort of led the way back in the 70s and that with his books. And, everyone, we have, whether the stories are true or not, and whether he made what we consider mistakes or not, John Green left us with an incredible library of information that we've taken on. And as you mentioned, no one ever recorded Ostman in his prime talking about this stuff. And I think this is where guys like you and Thomas that take the reports down are really important, because who knows, 50 years from now, people might be looking through your stuff and going, man, I'm glad he recorded that, or man, I'm glad he wrote that down.
Well, let's just put it this way. I have so much information here in my files. The Center for Bigfoot Studies, what I have is that at age 61, say I live to be 90, I don't think I'll have enough time to listen and read everything that Warren Thompson and George Haas collected. And it's a staggering amount of information. And they were like a closed organization. They really didn't share this information except amongst themselves. And so you'll see throughout the newsletters from 2012, I think when I got it, through 2024, there's a lot of stuff in there that has come from those files that they accumulated that has never seen daylight. And during the process of digging, of course, I knew about this before from Warren Thompson. I knew about the slides that George Haas took in June of '68, because when John Green went to the Patterson-Gimlin film site with Jim McLaren to do his recreation film, George Haas was with them, and he had a 35 millimeter camera, and he took slides of all these angles that you don't see in the Patterson-Gimlin film. So in my book, you're going to be able to see the Patterson-Gimlin film site from angles that you would never, ever imagine.
And see, that's the other, and I'm glad you brought that up. The other thing I said is about sharing the information to the public, because information that's not shared is irrelevant to the field. Like if I had a Sasquatch body in my basement and I never told the world about it, and I sat here, going, he, I got the only Sasquatch. Well, to the field of research, that body in my research is irrelevant. It's not until you can share it and also peer review it, which is a very important part. So I'm glad that you are, again, taking that information that was private and sharing it with the world so that A, others can review it, and B, so that it can add to the research that's out there.
Are all of you familiar with the researcher by the name of Peter Gatella?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, very, very heard the name, but that's about it.
Well, he's a researcher. He's still living, but I met him as a teenager. I was about 16 or 17. And he made a passing comment when I think we were having, myself and Doug Trapp, we were having dinner with him at a restaurant. And he said something like, because back then, this was probably the late 70s, there was no such thing as the internet. Everything was paper, physical files. And he said something like, what good is having your files if you don't have someone to share it with? And I thought it kind of hit me, and I said, he's right about that. He's absolutely right. What good is having filing cabinets with some of your good information if it's not shared with others? Because we don't live on this planet by ourselves. We live on this planet with about 8 billion people.
Good point. Archives are only valuable if the world is able to read and study them.
And what, I don't live in Canada, but if I were to magically be transported to Canada, what the people I would love to interview would be the 4 Crandall Lake eyewitnesses. I mean, that case is just, even today, I think is one of the best cases ever for the existence of Sasquatch.
Yeah.
And we're on the same page with that. That's one of the things that I'll just say, Jay, another friend of ours that's in our group but doesn't like the publicity. And we've said to Thomas since we first heard that story that story should be considered amongst the classic stories that are out there. Have 4 eyewitnesses that we know of. You have the marriage breakup. Still, everyone is still on the same page, even blaming each other for locking, out of the cars and that.
Can I stop you for a moment?
Sure.
So it would be different if in 1987, when this happened, 87 or 88, Tom?
88.
88. It would be different if these were like teenagers who were smoking pot and drinking and just losers in life who claimed this. But the people who claimed this were teachers, highly educated people that has some credibility in society. And so that's, again, what makes this case all the more impressive.
No, exactly. And that's, where we tried telling Thomas, to bring that just because he's never, like when he does his talks, I mean, he does a very brief talk about it. And I think he could do an episode just on that because it was, I consider it amongst what should be one of the classic tales that really not enough people know about.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we did that in one of your chronicles, Thomas, the Crandall campground.
Yep.
And we had the maps and everything between the sites and the entry and the exits and where the outhouse was and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we covered it from about every angle that you had information on to cover.
Well, I'm talking about when he does his talks in front of live groups.
Uh-huh.
He doesn't, in my opinion anyways, he doesn't toot his own horn sometimes in some of the stuff that he's investigated. Like he does a lot of his talk is about former researchers, that the Four Horsemen and things like that. But I do wish that he would put a little more emphasis on that one, because I think it's a recent enough event that people can relate to, and I think it's an undertold story. But anyways, that's
and one of the reasons when I was going to give a talk about the Sasquatch in general in one of the conferences we had at the planetarium, there was Daniel Perez who suggested to me I should talk about Crandall instead, and that's what I ended up doing.
He's a smart fellow, that Perez.
Yeah, pretty cool.
You should listen to him more often.
At the time, Stephen Harvey asked me to be the moderator of the sessions. And now that Thomas brings this up, I said, you know what you really should talk about is forget about all the other stuff. Just talk about the Crandall Lake incident. And so he did.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it was at that same conference. Oh God, I can't believe his name's gone out of my head.
Eric.
I had the sighting of the Anderson River that we went. First I went there with
McDonald.
Mike McDonald. Yeah, that's right. Mike McDonald. And we went there, and then I took you there, and John Green, a guy named Mellett, to the site. And boy, you wouldn't believe how that area has changed, Danielle. We went back there just a year ago, and I almost didn't recognize it. That trail we were on, that we saw the black bear, it's completely grown over. You never even know there was a road there at one time.
Wow. So it's more remote.
Yeah, even more remote now than it was then. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is Mike McDonald was a bear hunter, and he came in at the Sasquatch Symposium. I forget what year, 1997, somewhere around there. And he said, I had just seen a Sasquatch through my bear scope about a week ago. And he seemed to be matter of fact. And I had my official duties as the MC. And I think the first people on site was Barbara Wasson, the late Barbara Wasson, and Tom Steenberg. They went to investigate. And so that was incredible. I wish I could have went the first time.
Yeah.
And it's a big area. So like whatever was there could slip out into the trees real quick, because in fact, it's not a big area. It's a vast area. There's just nothing but woods out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, it's coming up to the top of the hour. And Daniel, can I ask you, will you drop back again sometime to continue these conversations?
We could. Now, just remember, bigfoottimes.net. That's how you got a membership. That's how you get a membership to the newsletter.
And all the information you need is right there on that page for subscriptions and everything else. Subscribe, you won't be disappointed.
But before we go, I'd kind of like to ask Daniel, do you remember the time you assassinated Krakatoa?
I remember that vividly. We were coming out of a cave, and I pushed some branches out of the way. And for whatever reason, I failed to realize that Thomas was immediately behind me. So I let the branches go. The next thing I know, I look behind myself, and there's Thomas with his smoking pipe, but it broke apart, or it came apart. So it was just, we had a good laugh over that.
Yeah, you just heard me go, go! Front end of Krakatoa ended up flying like 20 feet that way.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Oh, that cave was an old abandoned mine shaft. They still have the old wooden rails on the floor. That gold mine shaft there, about a third of the way up the east side of Harrison Lake. Yeah,
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, we were going up there with Joseph Ahovany. He was trying to show us the spots where his two encounters were.
So that's the tunnel with the tracks. Every time I went there, the tracks were underneath water.
Quite often it is underneath water, and quite often you can't see the entrance because it's so overgrown. You don't know it's there. You pass right by it. Yeah.
So Daniel, it was absolutely marvelous having you here this afternoon. And as I said, in all seriousness, we have to do this again, especially as it draws closer to your publication date.
Oh, absolutely.
Of your new project.
I wrote in my newsletter, I said, my objective of this book, Pictorial History on the PG film, is when you get a copy that I want your jaw to drop to the floor. That's my objective.
Well, if anyone can do it, you can.
I
I'm
hope
pretty
so.
certain of that.
So
Yeah.
that brings us a serious question, Daniel. If the book is that fantastic and there's no reason why it shouldn't be, does that mean you're going to be Bigfooter of the Year for the following year?
Woo!
I've never made Bigfooter of the Year in my own newsletter, so that could tell you maybe I am a little bit objective. If this book is what I think it's going to be, you are looking at the Bigfooter of the Year right now.
Trey Cool. Yeah. Okay, audience, thanks for joining us this afternoon. As usual, it's been a blast having you here. And special thanks to Mr. Perez for dropping by, and my fellow hosts, Bill and Leon and Thomas. Excellent gentlemen, as usual. We'll do it again this time next week. Everyone have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great